The room went completely silent when billionaire Cassian Vale walked through the doors and saw his daughter standing beside a single father with her hand gently resting on his shoulder. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The music stopped, conversations died, and even the wealthy guests who had spent the evening pretending nothing could surprise them suddenly looked terrified. Cassian had built an empire by refusing to forgive weakness, mistakes, or embarrassment. Yet what happened next would make every person in that room question whether they had misunderstood him all along. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that a person's worth should never be measured by their money, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of hope and humanity. The event was being held inside the glass-walled ballroom of the Vale Foundation, overlooking a beautiful city skyline under a clear afternoon sky. Sunlight poured through enormous windows, illuminating white marble floors, green indoor plants, elegant silver decorations, and hundreds of carefully dressed guests. Cassian Vale stood near the center of the room, surrounded by investors, politicians, business leaders, and old family friends. At 52, he was known throughout the country as a man who could turn failing companies into profitable empires. His name was printed on hospitals, universities, research centers, and luxury buildings, but few people knew what existed behind the polished image. Cassian had spent most of his life believing that love was a weakness and that people stayed close only when they wanted something. His daughter, Seraphina Vale, had always been the one person capable of challenging that belief. 27 years old, intelligent, compassionate, and quietly determined, Seraphina had never cared much about the world her father had built around her. She could have lived in luxury without lifting a finger, yet she spent several afternoons each week volunteering at a community learning center funded by the Vale Foundation. Cassian often complained that she wasted her time there, but secretly he admired the way she treated everyone with the same respect, whether they arrived in expensive cars or walked several miles to reach the center. That was where she met Rowan Mercer. Rowan was 35 and raising his 8-year-old son, Micah, alone. He had once worked as a construction supervisor, but after an accident at one of his projects left him injured and unable to continue heavy physical labor, his life became a daily struggle. He took temporary maintenance jobs, repaired appliances for neighbors, delivered packages whenever work was available, and stretched every dollar as far as possible. His greatest fear was not poverty itself. It was that Micah would grow up believing his father had failed him. Rowan never told Seraphina about his difficulties at first. She discovered them gradually. She noticed that he always arrived early to the learning center because he could not afford after-school care. She noticed the carefully repaired shoes Micah wore and the way Rowan quietly skipped meals whenever there was not enough food. Most importantly, she noticed how fiercely he protected his son's happiness. Rowan could have been exhausted, worried, and discouraged, but the moment Micah appeared, his entire face changed. Seraphina began helping them without making Rowan feel like a charity case. She found scholarships for Micah, connected Rowan with employment resources, and eventually helped organize a small repair workshop at the community center where Rowan could use his skills to earn a stable income. Somewhere between those ordinary afternoons, shared lunches, and long conversations about life, something unexpected happened. They fell in love. Neither of them knew how Cassian would react. They had kept their relationship private for months, not because Rowan was ashamed of Seraphina, but because he feared her father. Cassian's reputation had reached every corner of the business world. People said he could destroy a career with one phone call. Rowan had no money, no powerful connections, and no protection against a man like that. Seraphina believed her father might eventually understand. That hope disappeared on the afternoon of the foundation gala. Cassian had spent weeks preparing for the event. The foundation was announcing a massive education initiative, and nearly every influential person in the city had been invited. Seraphina was expected to stand beside her father for photographs and help present the new program. Instead, she had been delayed outside the ballroom because Micah had suddenly become nervous about entering the crowded event. Rowan had brought him after receiving an invitation through the community center. Seraphina found them near a quiet garden entrance. Micah was holding his father's hand, while Rowan knelt beside him, straightening the boy's jacket and reassuring him. Seraphina approached with a warm smile. Micah immediately brightened, and Rowan looked at Seraphina with the kind of expression that made it obvious they were more than friends. Unfortunately, Cassian saw everything. He walked toward them slowly. The people nearby recognized his expression and instinctively stepped aside. Seraphina looked up and immediately understood what was happening. Rowan stood straight, trying to remain calm, but his face revealed the fear he had been carrying for months. Micah moved closer to his father. Cassian stopped in front of them. Everyone expected an explosion. They expected him to humiliate Rowan, pull his daughter away, or order security to remove the man from the event. Some guests even raised their phones discreetly, anticipating a scandal that would become the story of the evening. Instead, Cassian looked at Micah. The little boy was wearing a modest navy jacket, polished shoes, and a small silver pin from the community center. He looked frightened but determined not to cry. Cassian's expression changed. Something about that child reminded him of a memory he had spent decades trying to bury. Cassian had not always been rich. At 12 years old, he had lived with his mother in a tiny apartment above a grocery store. His father had abandoned the family, leaving behind debts and broken promises. Cassian remembered his mother working 2 jobs while pretending she was not exhausted. He remembered once asking her for a new pair of school shoes and watching her quietly count the money in her purse before smiling and saying they would find a way. They had found a way. But somewhere along his journey from poverty to wealth, Cassian had forgotten what it felt like to be that child. He looked at Rowan and saw something familiar. Not weakness. Responsibility. The room remained silent. Cassian finally walked past Rowan and crouched down in front of Micah. The billionaire who had made executives tremble was now kneeling on a marble floor in an expensive suit, looking directly into the eyes of a nervous child. He noticed Micah's shoes. They had been carefully polished, but one of the soles was beginning to separate. Cassian looked at Rowan again. He understood. This man was not trying to enter his daughter's world because of money. If anything, he had spent months trying to stay away from it. Then Cassian did something nobody expected. He stood, turned toward the crowd, and announced that the man standing beside his daughter was not an embarrassment to the Vale family. He was a father who had worked harder than most wealthy men Cassian knew. He said that money could buy comfort but could never purchase character, and Rowan had something that money could not buy. Respect. The silence became even deeper. Cassian then admitted something that shocked everyone. He had spent years judging people by their bank accounts because he was terrified of becoming poor again. He had built walls so high that he nearly forgot why he had started climbing in the first place. He had believed protecting his daughter meant controlling her choices, but he finally understood that protection without trust could become another form of imprisonment. Seraphina stood frozen, tears gathering in her eyes. Rowan could barely process what he was hearing. Cassian turned toward him and offered his hand. But it was not a businessman's handshake. It was the handshake of a father accepting another father. Rowan hesitated before taking it. That simple gesture changed the entire atmosphere. Several guests lowered their phones. Some looked embarrassed by their earlier assumptions. Others wiped away tears. The people who had come expecting a billionaire's humiliation of a poor man were witnessing something far more powerful. Then Cassian walked over to Micah and carefully fixed the loose edge of the boy's shoe. He told everyone that the Vale Foundation's new education initiative would include a program for single parents who were working hard but struggling to provide opportunities for their children. He announced that Rowan would help design the program because someone who had lived that struggle understood it better than any wealthy executive ever could. Rowan's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, he felt that someone powerful had actually seen him. Not his financial problems. Not his worn-out clothes. Not his mistakes. Him. Over the following months, everything changed. Rowan became a consultant for the Foundation's vocational program and eventually opened the community repair workshop he had always dreamed of. Micah received a scholarship, but Cassian insisted it should never be treated as charity. He called it an investment in a child's future. Seraphina and Rowan continued their relationship, this time without hiding. But the most beautiful change happened between Cassian and Rowan. They did not become close overnight. Trust took time. Cassian had to learn that being a father meant listening instead of commanding. Rowan had to learn that accepting help did not make him weak. They disagreed, struggled, and sometimes misunderstood each other, but they kept choosing respect. One afternoon, nearly a year after the gala, Cassian visited Rowan's workshop. The place was busy with parents learning new skills, teenagers repairing bicycles, and workers building small furniture pieces. Micah was sitting at a table doing his homework while Seraphina helped another child with a science project. Cassian stood in the doorway and watched. He smiled. He finally understood that the greatest thing he had ever built was not a corporation, a skyscraper, or a financial empire. It was a family that had taught him how to become human again. Years later, people would still remember the afternoon when the billionaire caught his daughter with a single dad. But they would remember it for a reason completely different from what they expected. They would remember the moment a powerful man had the courage to admit that he had been wrong. They would remember a father who refused to be ashamed of his struggle. They would remember a daughter who believed love could change people. And they would remember a little boy whose worn-out shoes reminded a billionaire that dignity had never belonged to the wealthy. Sometimes the most important moments in life arrive disguised as scandals. Sometimes the person we are most afraid to accept becomes the person who teaches us what family really means. And sometimes, the strongest thing a powerful person can do is put pride aside, reach out a hand, and say, through actions rather than words, that everyone deserves a second chance. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes people can change, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who may need a little hope today. And before you leave, I have one special request. Comment, "Kindness changes everything," below if you believe that a person's heart is worth more than their bank account. Because in the end, Cassian did not lose his daughter to a single father. He gained a son, a grandson-like bond with a little boy, and something far more valuable than all the wealth he had spent his life chasing.